Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
I'm your host, Brice Lewis. Another jam-packed show for you guys. Obviously, we know a lot of stuff happening in the world today. Obviously, coronavirus talking about. Obviously, you know me, I do a basketball show too, so we'll talk about that there when that show comes up. We're talking about football right now. Obviously, we're going to talk about how the coronavirus is affecting the NFL today, but we're also going to talk about still news and notes around the league. As obviously, since the NFL is in its off-season, the coronavirus will not affect it in terms of games played, but maybe just in terms of maybe how they handle certain events like the draft and pro days and et cetera coming up. But like I said, there's also free agency stuff we're going to talk about today. Obviously, free agency is still scheduled to start next week, so obviously that's a big time for NFL fans. And I'm going to give you all the rumors and news right here on the podcast. Coming up next here on the podcast. And we're going to get right into it, really. And we're going to start with this. Tampa Bay has emerged as a favorite to get Tom Brady. Tampa Bay and the Tampa Bay Chronicles, they have said that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are planning to go all in on Tom Brady. They're planning to go all in on acquiring him to become the new quarterback of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They say they're going to try and they're going to hope that he decides to come there. So obviously, we'll have to see what happens when free agency comes with Tom Brady. When it comes to the Buccaneers, do they get a visit? Do they get a conversation with him? Obviously, I feel like that's not a bad place for him to go. I think it's an underrated spot. You're in the good weather of Florida. You have one of the best receiving cores in the league, I feel like. You have two running backs. You have Bruce Arians, a very respected and considered a very highly good head coach in this league. You have an up-and-coming defense with a lot of talent. It feels like everything you would want if you're a quarterback is Tom Brady. And the thing about it is, in this Tom Brady sweepstakes, there are a lot of teams in this situation that you look at and see and think, well, if Tom Brady goes here, this seems like the better situation. If Tom Brady goes here, this seems like this would be the better team than what he's at currently. But we just feel like, well, it's Bill Belichick. He's better than any coach in the league. And he'll always get the team in position to always compete for a championship year after year. Or every other new team, he has to learn them and he has to see, even though, yeah, this has potential, are they really going to end up being the team that they expect them to be? And that's obviously a big question. So we would have to see what happens when it comes to this. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how it's going to turn out. Now, I think this is an interesting situation because we think that, it's a situation that if Tom Brady goes to New England, not New England, but the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you would expect them to be the favorites. You would expect them to be the favorites in the NFC South, I would think, and you might even put them in the Super Bowl discussion as the new team to make it to the Super Bowl. So it would definitely be an interesting, again, situation if that happened. And I'm sure Tampa Bay fans would love to be able to get their hands on Tom Brady. Because then they feel like, well, that's definitely an upgrade over Jameis Winston. And we would be in a very good position to be one of the best teams in the NFC. And I think that's obviously what they want. That's what they would want to have. That's what they would want to see. And, I think that that's one of those things that I think is important for everybody involved that is with Tom Brady's camp, Tampa Bay's camp, And I'm sure Tampa Bay will pay him whatever he wants. I honestly feel like I could see some teams coming into the situation and they're just kind of like, listen, Tom, we'll do anything you want. Anything. We just need to know, like, hey, what do we need to do to get you here? Tell us what you want and we'll do it for you. I feel like every team is willing to do it. The only team that we feel like might not be willing to do it is New England. We feel like New England's like, we're going to do what we know what you want and we're willing to give you some of those things. But we will also do things based on accordance to what we want to do with the team. So that's obviously a question. And that's obviously something that a lot of people want to happen and want to see happen. And so I think that's important. I think that's super important. And, I think it's important that as a team, we come out there and we really set up what we need to do if you're Tampa. And basically just give them every reason to say, hey, Tom, you need to come here. We'll give you the best chance to win. But in other news, obviously, as we know, obviously we've been talking about Tom Brady, but now we're going to get into another big time free agent coming up in next week's free agency. And we're talking about Austin Hooper. Austin Hooper, Atlanta Falcon for the last 4 years of his career, has gotten better every year, has put up big numbers, and now is in line to be one of the highest paydays for a tight end in NFL history. Austin Hooper has a lot of suitors, a lot of people want Austin Hooper. The Chicago Bears want Austin Hooper. Obviously, because, giving Mitchell Trubisky that safety blanket, giving Mitchell Trubisky that person that he can go to and rely on, as a safety blanket, because we all know how important it could be for a tight end to have that safety blanket. Obviously, Washington is interested because Dwayne Haskins, if you give him an elite tight end, that'll help him. That could make him a better quarterback because you gave him a guy who can go up for catches, make plays, do things, make things happen, make things shake. That's why Austin Hooper would be great for Washington. And we've also heard Green Bay be connected to Austin Hooper, who they just released Jimmy Graham. So clearly, Hooper is in line for a lot of money. And no tight end currently makes more than $10 million a year, and Cooper is probably going to exceed that. Hooper is going to be one of 3 tight ends that really make a lot of money, especially if Hunter Henry gets franchise tagged by the Los Angeles Chargers. This is big for everybody involved, clearly. This is big for Hooper in his future. This is big because basically, with him, Kittle, and Travis Kelce about to reset the tight end market, this is going to be one of the best times for any tight end in the league as the tight end position becomes more important. And it just looks like, hey, he's going to be paid very handsomely for that performance. And it's just something that I'm sure Austin Hooper's happy about. I mean, obviously a lot of people are surprised the Falcons didn't try harder to keep him, knowing how important he has been to Matt Ryan these last few years. But obviously the Falcons are very tight-capped right now, and they probably felt like there's no point to free up space just to use all that space for one player and not be able to add any more players. So they probably just felt like this might be the best move for us in terms of trying to improve the team. We may lose a great tight end, but if we can improve other points of the team, it'll all be worth it at the end of the day. And lastly, we're going to talk about Jack Conklin, offensive tackle from the Titans. He's expected to be a free agent, and he's expected to make big money for a tight end. They say he might be the highest paid left tackle after free agency. Jack Conklin is a young, also below 25 guy, and has been one of the best tight ends. I mean, not best tight ends, best left tackles in the league. And obviously a young left tackle at his skill level is very important. And so it's going to be very important that Tennessee might want him, but they may not be able to pay him because Jack Conklin will have plenty of suitors. Because listen, people think quarterback's the hardest thing to get in this league. A left tackle. How many great left tackles are there in this league? Not a lot. You have a lot of competent left tackles. You have a lot of decent left tackles, but you don't have a lot of great left tackles. And that's one of the biggest issues that there is. But coming up next, could Byron Jones command one of the highest prices in free agency? Are the Texans potentially interested in Trent Williams and Chris Harris Jr.? And the 49ers will allow Emmanuel Sanders to test free agency. All that and more right here on the podcast.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we talked about different topics around free agency, like Austin Hooper. He's going to be very big in line for a big payday by a lot of NFL teams. We talked about some of the teams that were interested in him and how he can make an impact. We also talked about Tom Brady. Tampa Bay is courting Tom Brady, and they're going all in on Tom Brady. They really think that he'll probably be the difference between them winning and losing next year. And so they're saying we might as well go all in on Tom and see if we can get him to come to Tampa Bay. We feel like we have the team and the construction around him and the great head coach to get him to come here. Now we got to see if they can execute and pull off one of the biggest free agency surprises in history. And lastly, we talked about Jack Conklin, left tackle for the Tennessee Titans, entering free agency, looking like he could potentially become the highest paid left tackle in the league coming up this coming season. So obviously that's going to be a big deal. Now we're going to get into more free agency news. Byron Jones, cornerback for the Cowboys, is set in line to make a big payday. I'm hearing as much up to $17 million a year. Obviously, some people are very up and down on Brice on Byron Jones because of the fact that if you think about it, that he doesn't get a lot of interceptions. And I like a lot of people have always looked at him and thought, well, he doesn't make a lot of plays, but I guess he's just solid at covering. Obviously, people think the Cowboys should be trying harder to keep him, but it looks like with them having to pay Amari Cooper and with them having to try to work something out with Dak, they won't be able to keep him. And with the price demand of Byron Jones, it seems very unlikely. And obviously, the thing about the Cowboys is that a lot of people feel like outside of Byron Jones, they don't really have a solid cornerback on the team. So this will create a big hole for the Cowboys in their secondary. But obviously, we've talked, the Redskins have been interested. The Philadelphia Eagles are very much interested in getting him because obviously we know about their struggles in the back end. They're very much interested in trying to get Byron Jones in there to help and improve their back end of their defense. I'm sure there's a lot of teams in the mix, in the mix of just trying to basically improve your secondary. Because I mean, honestly, I think secondary is one of the most important positions in the league. Because yes, I understand that sometimes the secondary success can be brought off of defensive line pass rushing, but I also feel like you got to have guys who can cover in that back end, because sometimes you need them to cover to help the pass rush get to the quarterback. And I think that's going to be one of the most important things that any team would want in any situation. So we'll have to see where Byron Jones ends up. He'll have plenty of suitors wanting him on their team so they can feel like they have a number one corner who can go against your best receiver on an every Sunday basis and be able to cover him and not feel like they're not going to be able to do what they have to do to stop them. And to at least maybe not allow that receiver to go too wild, as they say. In other news, the Redskins are interested in a couple players. They're interested first, not the Redskins, my bad. Wait. Yeah, sorry about that, guys. I got a little confused there. But yes, actually the Texans are interested in a couple of players. And one of the players they're interested in is Chris Harris Jr. Obviously, we know about the Texans' trouble. They're also in on the Byron Jones sweepstakes, but they're also looking at other alternative options. Obviously, Chris Harris Jr. is one of the best nickel corners in the league, and listen, the Houston Texans need help at all corner positions. And so they're looking to probably bring him in to help that struggling secondary and to play better. So that's going to definitely help them. That's definitely going to put them in a good spot. If they can bring in someone to booster their secondary. If they were able to get Byron Jones and Chris Harris Jr., their secondary will instantly become one of the best in the AFC and been the best in the league. So obviously if they're able to pull off that would obviously work for them and be successful for them long term. Obviously that would help with success long term. And we would have to see what actually ends up happening in this situation if they were able to get Chris Harris Jr. into the team. Obviously, like I said, multiple teams are interested in Chris Harris Jr. as I've reported before or said on this podcast before. And clearly that means obviously teams are going to be doing what they need to do to try to get a guy like him. And obviously the Houston Texans are one of those people in the running. Another person that the Houston Texans are interested in. Obviously we know about their offensive line troubles. Last year they made a trade for Larry Tunsil to get the left side of their offensive line. Now they might trade for the left tackle and move him to right tackle to get the right side solidified, and that's Trent Williams. Obviously, if you pay attention to the Trent Williams saga in Washington, there was issues with him and John Gruden. There was issues that he had. He had a brain tumor for the season. They said he was healthy. He said he wasn't healthy. It was a lot of issues. So we ended up sitting out the entire season this year. And the Redskins are allowing him to pursue a trade. They also said Houston is also interested in acquiring him. If they were able to pull off and get another quality tackle, that would improve the bookend for Deshaun Watson, which means that at least the corners and the ends of their offensive line would be on lockdown, and they would be able to keep him clean. You never know. They might put Trent at left and maybe put Tunsil at right. You don't know. But obviously, if they were able to acquire a guy of his talent, that would definitely help Deshaun Watson. Because obviously, Houston has been known for their offensive line woes. Ever since Deshaun Watson has been in the league, he has been hit and sacked more than any other quarterback in 3-4 years. I mean, honestly, they're trying to do anything they can to improve their offensive line and to progress it forward and to become what's going to happen moving forward. And like I said, if they can pick up a guy like Trent Williams, all that can do is help out the Houston Texans and help them try to be able to make another run next year to get back into the playoffs and maybe make even a deeper run, knowing that their offensive line is more and better in place. Lastly, the 49ers are going to let Emmanuel Sanders, the guy they traded for in the middle of the season from the Denver Broncos, test free agency. Obviously, people think this might be risk for 49ers. You traded for him because you thought that he would open up the offense for you from a receiver position, because the 49ers had a lot of young receivers. They didn't have a lot of veteran guys who've been in this situation. Their best receiver before them was Samuel. Deebo Samuel. And he's fine. He'll be probably one of the better receivers in the league in a couple of years, but obviously making a Super Bowl run, you needed a guy who's been there, been through it, knows how to work, knows how to play well in clutch situations. And Emmanuel Sanders is that guy. And they brought him in, and the offense did improve, I feel like, from a passing perspective when Emmanuel Sanders did enter the fray. So it's interesting that they're going to allow him to test free agency, allow him to potentially leave in free agency, knowing the importance of a guy like this to their team. Now, I don't know if they think maybe Emmanuel won't get paid what they think he'll get paid. I'm sure the 49ers have talked to him, had some discussions. We don't know if the 49ers are truly out of it, or it's one of those things where they just think, we're going to let you test it and see what happens. Obviously, maybe the 49ers have a plan. They maybe feel like with this type of receiving core we have, or this receiving draft that we have coming up, we can afford to maybe let another guy like Emmanuel Sanders walk and bring in a talented young receiver again. We've had success in the past, obviously, with a guy like Deebo Samuel, and maybe we can pull it off again. Obviously, it may look weird. I'm sure a lot of 49er fans would like to keep him on the team to make sure they have a veteran receiver who can play well, get first downs, get touchdowns, and maybe be that one receiver for Jimmy Garoppolo. But, all you can do is trust in what your team is doing and hope for the best. That's really all you can do, is hope for the best and hope that they're doing the right things that are needed for everybody to be able to play at a high level, contribute, and help the 49ers potentially get back to where they were this past year, which was in the Super Bowl, moving forward. Because obviously that's what everybody wants. That's what everybody wants to do. And that's what everybody feels like is going to put them in the right position to be successful moving into the long-term future of the 49ers franchise. So we'll have to see what happens in that situation when that situation arises. But coming up next, obviously this has been a free agency episode of the GSMC Football Podcast. More free agency news coming up. Robbie Anderson wants to re-sign with the Jets. Raiders place Gabe Jackson on the trade block, and the Packers are willing to let Brian Blaga, one of the most consistent and best offensive linemen, walk. All that right here and more on the podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast, right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. Last segment, we talked about Byron Jones potentially being a big money man, getting upwards of $17 million a year. That could be one of the highest price tags in free agency for a cornerback, if not the highest. The Texans are interested in potentially trading for left tackle for the Washington Redskins' Trent Williams to help boost their offensive line. And then go get Chris Harris Jr. to boost their secondary. So if they make one of those moves, I'm sure that will help provide an improvement for the Houston Texans as a team. And lastly, we also talked about the 49ers allowing Emmanuel Sanders to be able to go out into free agency and test free agency and see what happens out there on the open market, potentially getting a big deal. But we talked about all that last segment. Now we're going to get into this segment's news. Robbie Anderson, wide receiver for the New York Jets for the past few years, is going to hit free agency this offseason. He is considered one of the better deep threats out there in free agency. But there's been speculation if he'll be coming back to the New York Jets or would he potentially leave. There have been teams that have shown interest. And there have been some teams that Robbie Anderson have been interested in. But the thing that I hear more than anything is Robbie Anderson would like to re-sign with the New York Jets. So that creates the possibility for the Jets to maybe negotiate a deal and go ahead and be a part of the Jets long term. Obviously, this would be a good deal for them if they can keep a deep threat. The Jets, you could say one of their weakest positions is the wide receiver position on offense. And getting a guy like Robbie Anderson, who I may consider their best receiver, will only help And then potentially adding another receiver could also help for the long term. Obviously, it's important that everybody comes out there whenever the league year starts to talk about it and to see what the right move is going to be. Because clearly, it's important that they do what they got to do to be successful, and they put themselves in a position to be successful long term, to get him back on the team, to keep the deep threat that they want, and for them to come out there and maybe hopefully have a good season if Sam Darnold can be healthy the whole year. Robbie Anderson is a key to all of that. So I'm sure it's very important that they figure out a way to keep him happy and give him the deal that he wants. He wouldn't command a lot necessarily, so that shouldn't be the issue. It's just more of working out the finer things in the contract where both sides are happy with what's being put into the contract, or being finalized in the contract, and then getting him on the field for next season to then move forward and trying to win for the New York Jets for years to come. Other free agency news. The Raiders placed Gabe Jackson on the trading block. Gabe Jackson is a Pro Bowl offensive lineman. The offensive line of the Oakland Raiders is their strength, and they're putting one of their great linemen on the market. So I'm sure Gabe Jackson will get some people who will be interested in him. I'm sure the Raiders are looking for good compensation. They're looking for a good reason to trade him. So that means good value. First round pick, maybe second round pick, third round pick. Really just depends. Maybe they want an offensive lineman in return. We really don't know. It's one of those things we just have to see about when we get to it. And I'm sure, like I said, they'll have plenty of people who are interested in Gabe. Like I said, Gabe is one of the premier offensive linemen in the league. And obviously, offensive line, if any team could get a good offensive line or boost their offensive line, they'll definitely want to look into this trade with Oakland and see maybe what they would want to potentially be successful and win. That's kind of the big thing. So we'll have to see what happens when it gets down to it in the future of teams, and just continue to be successful and play at a high level wherever he's traded to, in Oakland getting the compensation back to then maybe make some selections and do some things to help provide success for them in the future. Which I'm sure, which is always what you want to get out of these trades, is a piece to help promote for the future of your franchise, to build towards a successful team, and for y'all to be very creative and make a move forward. Lastly, Green Bay is letting Brian Bulaga test free agency. He has been one of the most consistent and best offensive linemen. He will probably get a very good deal in free agency when he hits the market. So it will definitely be something that will be interesting to see what happens. It'll be interesting to see how it ends up. like I said, it's very important to get a tackle in this league. I'm sure teams will definitely vie for him. Usually, you always feel like when teams let a player hit free agency, that usually means they're going to let him walk, with maybe a small possibility of coming back. Sometimes teams do it because they think maybe they're not going to get the offers they thought they would get and make them realize, well, you either can take our offer or not get the offer you want. So that's going to be something that's clear to me about what happens going into the future. And the Packers, obviously, I can understand it, especially if they go after Austin Hooper. You're having to give a lot of money to Hooper. You might spend a lot of money on another free agent. You may not have enough money to go around. So maybe letting go of one of your offensive linemen is a decision that you have to be willing to make to be able to get certain players that you may want. So clearly that's going to be a very important situation and a very important idea, and etc. So you got to make sure that you have a plan in place when you're doing this, which doesn't put everybody at risk, which doesn't hurt everybody on your team, because maybe you make this guy, let this guy go just to bring in someone else. Make sure that you're improving instead of not being a better team, and you have a backup plan for a player that you're letting go and who you may want to plug into that position. Sometimes, like I said, some teams do this maybe to get younger, so that could be potentially one of the reasons why they are doing this. We don't know. We don't have clear confirmation, but that's always something that I think a lot of NFL teams look at when making a decision or a move like this moving forward. So, there you go. But coming up next, CBA voting pushed back to Saturday and the franchise tag pushed back to Sunday. Teams' travel plans have been altered by the coronavirus. And Rob Gronkowski, the former football player for the New England Patriots, is about to actually start his new career with another company. Find all of that out here and more right here on the podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we talked about Robbie Anderson, deep threat for the New York Jets, wanting to sign with the Jets this offseason, not wanting to go to another team, having clear intentions to want to go back to the New York Jets. The Raiders placed Gabe Jackson on the trade block, so clearly they're looking to get some value, some picks back. Obviously, now that they're the new Vegas Raiders, they feel like we need to boost other parts of our team and boost our draft stock moving on into the future. And the Packers are willing to let Brian Bulaga, a consistent offensive tackle that they've had around for many years, walk and free agency and find a new team. He has been one of the most consistent players on Green Bay and been there as one of the longest tenured players on Green Bay since Rodgers. So, obviously, that's a big deal. If you're a team who needs some offensive tackle help, Brian Bulaga will be on the market. Now we're going to get to some more around the league news, not really free agency news, but around the league news. So obviously CBA voting was pushed back to Saturday and the franchise tag was pushed back to Sunday. The reason for this is to give players, obviously in terms of the pushback for the voting, players all the time in the world to truly understand what they're reading, understand if this is the right decision, which vote do they want to go with, what do they like, what do they prefer, and making a decision based upon their information that they have and they know. And then obviously the franchise tag is also, depending on what the players do, it gives the owners and teams about another day or two to help decide if they're going to franchise tag a player. Because you have heard that some teams have been hesitant to do any negotiating because of the fact that they don't know if the CBA is going to be accepted yet. So maybe if they know if the CBA is going to be accepted or not, that can help forward their negotiations with a player that they may have franchised. And we might see some progression there. Obviously, again, the CBA decision that the players are making is going to be very important because obviously this is it's very, very well thought out by the owners. A lot of players around the league are very torn on this decision. You've heard more star players speak out against it, where you've heard more just, I guess, core, decent, good players around the league. Nobody, not stars, but like just players that play in this league, have a name, but not stars. They've kind of agreed to it. So it really just depends on your values. I can understand from a star player's perspective why they want more, because they feel like, well, I want to be like an NBA player. I want to be like a baseball player who has a lot of power over the league. I can get a bunch of money. I can get all these things that benefit me because I'm a star. I'm a big name. It's important that I'm satisfied. Where a lot of players who aren't on that level and status don't have those same rights. So maybe this deal fits them better because it helps them more than it helps a player who's already a star. Because we do have to talk about that. Sometimes where you're positioned as a star might make you view yourself different from just a normal player. But the thing is that about star players in the NFL, they have to understand that the NBA stars and the MLB stars, when they go to the forefront trying to help see what happens within the player union, they think about not just themselves, but everybody else. The NFL players could be thinking about us, and then if we get what we want, and so on and so forth. So you got to get to the forefront of it. Think about every player, not just what benefits you, and maybe that way y'all can come to a realization, or y'all can come to a point of understanding. I would think that's something you want to come to, a point of understanding on this situation, so there isn't a concern around the league. So we'll have to see. And like I said, the franchise tag situation will definitely play out in an interesting fashion. We'll see what teams decide to do. We don't really know what their mindset is. We don't know what people are thinking. We don't know if the CBA is agreed to, or is it agreed to, how players will now approach the players that they have gone ahead and franchised. It's just a lot of questions that you don't really have all the answers to, and so you kind of wonder about it a little bit. You wonder what really is going on, so to say. You wonder what is the mission here? What is trying to be accomplished? What is the goal that is wanted to be accomplished by all these teams? So definitely got to see what happens here with this situation. Obviously, with all the news about a lot of things canceling around the sports world, NFL right now still looks like everything's going on as planned. So we should still get some news about what the vote ends up being, and then who ends up signing a long-term deal when it comes to the franchise tag. So this is going to be a very interesting time for the NFL, since they're in their off season, and see how they go about into the future with a lot of things that they decide to do in a long-term spectrum. So we'll have to see what happens there with that part of things. Now we're going to get into some talk about how the coronavirus is affecting teams. Now, obviously, the draft's coming up in about a month. Pro days are happening. Obviously, this is around the time you still send your scouts out. Teams go out to scout certain players. And basically, if you think about it, scouting players, some people can't travel with the coronavirus. Teams are having to postpone plans, change plans, adjust plans, all of it, because of the coronavirus. And they're just doing what they feel like is necessary to help benefit anybody moving forward who could be involved with the situation. Obviously, you don't want head coaches, scouts getting sick because of this. So obviously, it's understandable again why this is happening. You definitely have to see how it turns out, to me. So, we'll have to see what happens moving into it. Obviously, the coronavirus is getting a lot of news, a lot of big talking points around the association, around a lot of different things. It affects the NFL too, even though their season may not particularly be going on right now. It affects things too, and you want to make sure everybody is safe and everybody's protected from this situation as best possible, because you don't really want it starting to creep into the NFL side of things, or they may have to start canceling more things moving forward. But now we talk Rob Gronkowski. Obviously, Rob Gronkowski retired from the league. Some people thought, would he potentially come back? And it looks like it's not. Looks like he has decided to go ahead and start a new career. A new career in wrestling. Rob Gronkowski has signed a deal to join the WWE. And he will officially, I think, put the stamp on anybody saying he might return now that he's signed with the WWE officially and continue. Now he's starting his second career. Obviously, if you pay attention to Rob, he's a very big partier, as a charismatic man. You think it would probably work for him there. He was at WrestleMania a couple of years ago. So this is something that I'm sure that he's had interest in after his playing career was over. And now it looks like he's going to go ahead and now act upon those interests and desires and go ahead and pursue a career in wrestling. Coming up next, NBC denies the Al Michaels trade. The Rams could trade Todd Gurley. And for video games fans of football franchises, NFL 2K is coming back with video games. All that and more right here on the podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. last segment, we talked about the CBA extensions on the voting for the CBA deadline and for the franchise tag, what that means, what it means for both sides, players, owners, coaches, teams, how that's going to all work out, how that's all going to shake itself out at the end of the day, and the next steps after that, if it does get approved or not get approved, when and how it affects the franchise tag. We also talked about how the coronavirus is affecting teams' travel plans when coming to scouting a lot of these tight players around the league, getting ready for the NFL draft, how some teams have had to cancel and change and maybe only send scouts or stuff like that, how that's affected things, obviously causing shambles within the NFL also. And then we talked about Rob Gronkowski starting his new career as a WWE superstar. So now we have more news just around the league. So as you remember, ESPN was interested in trading for Al Michaels because they wanted to pair him up with Peyton Manning. And they wanted to create, I guess, a super booth team with him and Peyton. Well, NBC has responded to this trade, and they have gone ahead and declined it. They have gone ahead and said, no, we're not trading you Al Michaels. Now, ESPN is still in talks with Peyton. They think a deal will be done sooner rather than later. But obviously, they're probably looking for a new lead play-by-play guy to go with Peyton. Obviously, ESPN, if you've watched Monday Night Football, you can maybe even say since John Gruden was there, Monday Night Football has kind of started to die a little bit in terms of popularity because sometimes a lot of the matchups aren't good and also the broadcast teams turn people off, which is the reason why they're trying to bring Peyton Manning, because it will bring a nostalgia of, Peyton Manning's in the booth on Monday Night Football. I want to watch Monday Night Football for Peyton Manning. Plus, if he's good at his job, that can keep viewers, and if the games are good, then they can only go up from here and be more successful long term. We'll have to see who ESPN, since they can't get Al Michaels, who they're going to put in that spot next to Peyton as a play-by-play guy. They have some good play-by-play guys. Would they take someone potentially from the college ranks? Are they going to go with Joe Tessitore still and just say you're going to be the guy next to Peyton? What kind of changes they're going to make? I wouldn't be surprised if Monday Night Football gets a makeover this year. Because obviously ESPN is trying to boost ratings for the Monday Night Football games that they have, because they feel like maybe ratings have been too slow leading up to this already. And obviously you always want to adapt and change, so I understand why this is something that they would definitely want to do and try to make happen, if they potentially could happen. Because you do want that superstar tag team. If you're going to have a guy like Peyton in there, I mean, you would feel like they're not going to do a 3-man booth, so you feel like they're really at this point just looking for a play-by-play guy to hopefully come in there and team up with Peyton. That's going to be what they want. That's what they're going to be looking for. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. It's going to be interesting to see what happens there and see if they can maybe get the guy they want to get in there and be able to do the play-by-play that they want, and hopefully have a great broadcast team with Peyton, and Monday Night Football can maybe get back to where it used to be as one of the most looked forward to football games of the week. Because Monday Night Football games should always have a big feeling, and it just feels like when you watch Monday Night Football games, it's not as big as it should be. So, now with some team news. It's been a rumor going around for a while. Obviously with Todd Gurley, ever since he got arthritis in his knees, never been the same player ever since the Super Bowl run, that the Rams might be looking to trade Todd Gurley. And recently, Sean McVay says that he needs to have a talk with Todd Gurley soon. And Todd Gurley said, well, coach has my number. So, clearly, it's something that I think both sides think is coming, I think. And obviously the question is, what if they do decide to put Todd Gurley on the trade block? What are you going to be asking for? What are you going to be wanting from people for Todd Gurley? Because you have to understand, this isn't the Todd Gurley that you paid the money to because of his production. This is a different Todd Gurley. So what you want for him may not be as high. So you definitely want to make sure that you figure out what happens and not try to over ask for certain compensation for Todd. If you're a smart organization, you're realistic and you try to get the best you can get, but not over ask for something. And that way, once you make that deal, you just make some things happen and you kind of just go from there. It's kind of crazy seeing, I guess you can call it the fall of Todd Gurley, as this man about 2 years ago was considered the best running back in the NFL, or one of the best running backs in the NFL. Now he's not even in that discussion. It really shows you the struggle of arthritis. It can affect you. And you're seeing how it affects an NFL player. Obviously, a lot of this is because Todd Gurley has torn his ACLs before, lost a lot of cartilage in his knee, which now his knees now bump and rub, which might be one of the reasons why he has arthritis. And why the situation is the way it is now. So, you know how this goes. It's a very frustrating situation, I'd say. Difficult situation for any player in this situation to not be valued at the same way you used to be valued, and how it affects you moving forward. And we'll have to see what happens with Todd Gurley moving forward. So all we can do is wish him the best. He can still play. He can still be productive. He can still make things happen. He's just not the same player he used to be. That's all that is, really. So there you go. But now we're going to get to some news for sports gamers who love football. Obviously, since 2006 release of Madden 06, that has been the only legitimate football game that has been on the market from a professional standpoint. Obviously, we know about NCAA, and that's a completely different story. But we know what's been happening with Madden. Now, this is from the gamer myself and other people who might relate to me listening to this. 2K. People consider 2K and 2K5 one of the best football games ever created. And a lot of people have missed 2K ever since some people feel like Madden has kind of lost its luster. It's not as good as it used to be. EA is just trying to exploit money out of it, not really caring about the actual gameplay itself. And now 2K has now agreed to a deal to come back in 2021 with a new game with dealing with NFL. Now, the only thing about this game is that it's non-simulated, as Madden's a simulated game, so we'll have to see what 2K comes up with. But this is a very exciting time for a lot of football sporting game fans, because they get to play their favorite game again. They get to play their favorite game again and have a different alternative from Madden. It's always good to sometimes have alternatives that are different from other game choices. You don't always want that one singular game. You want to have options. And 2K now is about to come back and give players who may be tired of Madden an option. And I'm sure a lot of people are very, very excited about that. But coming up next, I'm going to give y'all the update on how the coronavirus has affected the league as a whole, and how it could affect the league going into the future with the draft and all the other stuff coming up right here on the podcast. Stay tuned.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we talked about NBC denying ESPN's trade for Al Michaels to help pair them with help pair him with Peyton Manning. And obviously, now we have to see what ESPN does next after that, ever since not being able to get that trade pulled off. Todd Gurley could be on the trade market very, very soon. Both head coach and running back have hinted at a conversation that is going to happen between them two. So do not be surprised if that potentially happens going forward. And we also talked about, for gamers, how NFL 2K is coming back. And now you'll have another alternative option from Madden. So if you're tired of the Madden series, you think it's not good, you think they're exploiting you, you now get another option for gaming in 2021. And that's going to be obviously a very exciting time for a lot of people to have another gaming option again in the football franchise of any football in terms of the entire football world. And hopefully we can get NCAA football back too. Then we'll be at the peak of gaming once again, in my opinion, in terms of football. But now I'm going to inform everybody on how, right now, from what we know, how the coronavirus is affecting everything in the league. So far what we know is that the league had to cancel its annual league meeting because of the coronavirus. It was scheduled for later this month, and now they won't have it. So obviously that's a big deal. Obviously, I've mentioned before, a lot of teams around other leagues are canceling their seasons, their meetings, their games, because of the coronavirus. Obviously, the coronavirus is sweeping the nation by storm. It's become a what's that word? I forgot. Pandemic around all over the world. Right now, the NFL is not as affected because it's the off season. So in terms of seasons, they're not losing anything, but it can still affect some off season things. Their league year is supposed to start next Monday. So right now, the league says that they think they'll be able to start it. Now, there are some concerns that they won't be able to start. They won't be able to start on Monday. There has been concerns they won't be able to actually go through with it because of some issues that they're having with travels. Obviously, you would think if you're going to sign players, then free agency, they have to travel to you. And that's obviously a concern because you don't want to sign a free agent. Next thing you know, he gets coronavirus. So, obviously, that's something that some people are concerned about. But right now, the NFL is saying stand pat. And they're still going to go on and go ahead and make this deal happen, as they're going to continue to go ahead and say that the new league year will start next week. Now, obviously, I don't think right now we are in any danger of potentially losing any games during the season. I think since really the actual preseason starts in August, the training camp starts in July, a lot of people think things will have died down by then. The virus might have been is going to probably be more contained and go away. So in terms of actual playing, it's not going to be anything bad. As far as we know, no NFL player has tested positive for corona. So right now, no NFL player has been affected by it. So right now, there's a lot of potential negativity that could come out of this, but nothing intimate that's coming out of this. So obviously right now everybody's kind of just on their hands and needles, just trying to see, okay, so what exactly is going to happen here? What is actually going to actually transpire? What is actually going to actually come off and happen? What actually is actually going to come about? Things like that. That's what everybody's kind of looking at, wondering about, trying to see about, etc., etc. Obviously, you don't want any of your favorite players getting affected, so obviously, you should probably go check on your local physician or anybody if you want to learn more information about the coronavirus and know who's more at risk than others. Obviously, like I said, we know about what's happening in the NBA right now, which I'll talk about more in the NBA show. And other leagues too. I'm sure other people on this podcast network are going to be talking about it in some capacity on all their podcasts. But yeah, so right now the NFL right now is everything's fine, but they, like I said, they may have to do the NFL draft without any fans, which obviously would kill the incitement for the event, but obviously to protect the players. So that's something that could potentially happen. And obviously you don't want it to happen. You kind of just hope for the best right now. The XFL right now is still on schedule. We haven't really heard too much out of the XFL in terms of no fans or if they're canceling play. So maybe tomorrow we might hear something. We are not 100% sure yet if we will. So we'll have to see what happens in that regard. Also, just around the league, obviously we're seeing the effects that it has in other leagues. NFL players are like, dang, it's crazy what's going on. Schools are canceling everywhere. So obviously that's something. I'm sure I feel like this affects college football more because obviously this is around the time where, again, a lot of college football teams practice, train, spring practice happens. You usually have spring games and all that. And that's obviously something that's a big deal going forward. And so, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the NCAA because, like I said, they're suspending all their sports, and obviously means I'm sure practice for football will be canceled, and so you got to think about how many freshmen sometimes try to enroll early, and how you enrolled, but now you can't even practice because now they don't even want anybody on campus. How that's going to affect college football in terms of recruiting. You can't really recruit if you're scared to get on a plane and meet a recruit because you don't know what's going to happen to you when you get there. You don't want to even recruit coronavirus because that's definitely going to get you ruled out for them to even come to your team. It really does affect college football more than the NFL. It's something that obviously you can say is a big deal. It's something that obviously will probably remain a big deal until the situation dies down moving forward into the future, multiple things. Just going out there competing, having to wait maybe till late summer potentially to really practice with the team. Would that maybe make college football maybe think about pushing back their season? That's a question I think people are going to have. Or would they feel like they're still going to have an adequate amount of time to practice and get ready for week 1 of the college football season? So obviously that's going to be something that's a big deal moving forward. And like I said, just wishing all my condolences to everybody out there, hoping everybody stays safe. Like I said, if anything new happens in the NFL, we'll talk about it here on the podcast. I'll give you my thoughts. I'll break it down as best as I can because I'm not an expert on this. This is medical. I'm not a medical person. But I'll give you any information I have. And, we'll see what happens if the new league year and everything is going to go as planned and et cetera. Me and Ethan will definitely cover that on Monday. talk about all the events that happened from the weekend, because I'm sure we'll have plenty of news coming into that Monday show. So I definitely want to tune in for that on Monday and look forward to, being able to discuss this with all of you and, maybe hearing your opinions on social media. So there you go. But that was the GSMC Football Podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. I was your host, Brice Lewis. Glad you could come and tune in for another episode. Please don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. It's going to be in the description box below. Thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.